أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Chapter 4. Freedom, Equality, and Liberty. Religious Indoctrination and Religious Freedom. Freedom is more important than La ilaha illallah because without freedom, we are not free to believe whatever we choose. This is what one Syrian activist told me several years ago regarding the Arab Spring. It seemed like he was setting up a false dichotomy, but he was just trying to emphasize the place of freedom as a value, as compared to everything else. But freedom is a misunderstood concept. The truly free person, according to liberal philosophy, beginning with the European empiricists of the 18th and 19th centuries, is the person who starts off with a blank slate, i.e. the tabula rasa. This person has no prior beliefs or commitments. His mind is not contaminated with falsely imposed ideas about the world, about God, about the state of nature. This person with his free mind is then able to form his own authentic beliefs from scratch. Ideally, those beliefs will be formed on the basis of sound scientific investigation. That's what the empiricists hope for, at least in their philosophy of mind and epistemology. But even a person does not develop beliefs scientifically, at least he does so authentically and hence freely. In this way, it is okay for a person to be religious so long as that person started from a blank slate, which for all intents and purposes is a starting point of non-religion. It is interesting when you put it like that. If I was born into a family with a certain religion and that family taught me that religion from day one, and I grew up professing that faith, does that mean that I did not freely choose that faith for myself? I might argue that, as an adult, I am making a conscious choice and exercising my free will to commit to my particular faith. But then, how can I know that it is really me making that choice and not the me that grew up in a certain household and as a product of a certain kind of religious indoctrination? Maybe I've been brainwashed, in which case my choice is not really a choice at all. But if that's the case for children growing up in religious households, then the same kind of indoctrination happens in non-religious households too. It is just brainwashing of the non-religious variety. If a child is raised to not believe in a higher power and to not think much of faithful devotion, then if he grows up and decides to be an atheist and mock religion, etc., then was that truly a free choice? Or is he also the product of his environment? Point being that the tabula rasa does not exist, and neither does the neutral blank slate liberal thinkers imagine we could freely develop our beliefs from. There is no blank slate. We are all born into a certain condition and raised to believe certain ideas and values that are imposed on us as children and then throughout our adult lives. The only question is, are those ideas and values true and just? If yes, who cares if one arrives at them from a position of freedom, i.e. a blank slate that in reality does not exist? And if those ideas and values are false and unjust, then the only way to counter that is with truth and justice, not with an abstract notion of freedom, which again is a figment of the Enlightenment's imagination. Either way, La ilaha illallah, as the ultimate expression of truth and justice, comes out on top. Put another way, freedom of religion in secular nations assumes a starting point of non-religion. But why is non-religion the starting point, the neutral ground? Why are non-religious values the default? One might say, well, there are a variety of religious beliefs, so rather than prefer or endorse one, the secular state chooses none. But this is a gross mischaracterization of the reality. Non-religion is also a particular set of beliefs. If the secular state chooses non-religion, it has still preferred and endorsed a particular belief system over others. This is essentially no different from a theocratic state that also chooses one particular set of beliefs over all others. The difference is, the theocratic state does not delude itself into thinking it is neutral. And of course, the primary difference is that the theocratic state based on Islam is upholding truth and justice, which can only be found in Islam. Islam does not respect freedom of religion. Many, but not all, of those who have a problem with the claim Islam does not respect freedom of religion actually have a problem with the idea that God does not respect freedom of religion. That is really the core of their problem. The idea that there is only one religion acceptable to God is inherently repulsive to them. How could God not respect people's freedom of conscience? How could a merciful God not respect people's freedom of choice? This is also why we see some Muslims who adopt a value like religious freedom ultimately leave Islam because of that value. Why? Well, why should tolerance for religious beliefs end at death? If we demand as a matter of principle, ethics, and justice that worldly rulers tolerate every and all beliefs equally, then why wouldn't we demand that of God as well? But then we learn that no, the reality is that it does matter what a person believes. It matters to God as He has informed us, not only in the last revelation, but also in all previous revelations as well. To maintain a principle like religious freedom for dunya, but salvific exclusivity for the akhirah is, to say the least, a major tension, if not an outright contradiction. Many Muslims today, as they are living under the hegemonic influence of liberal secularism, increasingly have opted to abandon salvific exclusivity and to maintain that beliefs neither matter in dunya nor in akhirah. Such people preach, all religions are essentially the same. All religions are paths to God. All religions lead to good, etc. It might appear that respecting the value of religious freedom is merely a political and pragmatic issue that Muslims can disagree about. In reality, political ideals have severe consequences for the iman of the average Muslim. This is how philosophical liberalism, from which the value of religious freedom originates, is able to subtly but significantly distort Muslim belief and misguide otherwise faithful believers. May Allah protect us all. The Golden Rule: Self-worship and Satanism. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. This is the central value of Satanism, as expressed by Aleister Crowley in his foundational book on satanic belief, The Book of the Law. Question: how do you effectively control a person? Methods can vary, but history has shown that one of the most effective tools for this purpose is to tell people that they are in charge, that they are the masters of their own destiny, that they are their own gods. Humans are predictable creatures. We make predictable choices. We often submit to our desires. We do whatever we can to preserve and bolster our egos. We wallow in short-term pleasures, and we hoard shiny things. This is the base core of the average human person. If you tell people to be free, to do what they want, to follow their heart, and all the other self-help, positive psychology, liberal philosophy cliches and doctrines we constantly are being fed, everything from the jingoistic promise of liberty, freedom, and empowerment for all to a commercial slogan like "just do it," then people are all going to converge on the same basic core, all the while believing that they are truly the masters of their own destiny and firmly in control of who they are. It is not unlike being a drug addict. Addicts feel like they are in control and feel like they are making their own decisions. And actually they are. But the problem is, those decisions are predictably bad and lead to nowhere except utter destruction. This is also how imperial powers used the introduction of drugs and alcohol to destroy and gain control of once powerful native peoples around the world. Point being, reduce people to their base selves and they can be effectively controlled for whatever purpose. And here's the kicker. The Golden Rule is nothing other than do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Do unto others what you would have them do unto you. This by itself is an empty principle. It has no content. It cannot direct you to any direction. It cannot help you make a moral choice. Why? Because it leaves open the question, what exactly would you have others do unto you? Treat others how you would want to be treated? Well, how exactly do you want others to treat you? This is just another way of putting yourself at the center of the equation. What matters to you is all that matters. Your moral compass shall be your own graven image projected on the world. That is not righteousness, that is idolatry. Is it any wonder that the Golden Rule is a central pillar of liberalism? And yes, you will see those hackneyed posters about how all religions have a form of the Golden Rule, but that is deceptive because those versions of the Golden Rule are not meant to stand alone. They come in conjunction with religious law. So when the Prophet ﷺ is reported to have said, "None of you truly believes until he wishes for his brother what he wishes for himself," he doesn't mean that if a person wishes for himself to be married to his gay partner, for example, that he should wish that for others as well. No. What is meant is that a person wishes goodness for himself, and goodness is decided by Allah and not open to anyone's personal whims and interpretation. So, by cutting off the Golden Rule from its religious context and cleaving it from its place firmly embedded in the edifice of Allah's commands, i.e. the Sharia, liberalism further propagates self-worship. And who was the first being to worship himself? Quote, "Thou hast created me from fire, while thou hast created him from clay." End quote. Surah Al-A'raf, Quran chapter 7, verse 157. Freedom of thought. Freedom of thought is something all people assume they have by default. No one thinks his thoughts are not his own. In reality, the vast majority of people's thoughts are heavily dictated and outright controlled by larger societal forces. Today's loud and proud and obnoxious freethinkers are no exception. But here's a broader example. What if I were to tell you that there are clear conflicts between Islam and American and Western values? I'm not going to elaborate on this claim because that's not the point. The point is that even the thought that there is a conflict between being Muslim and being American is considered all but blasphemy to many American Muslims. Now pause for a second. If you're reading the above and feel annoyance, anger, incredulity, or you're just thinking about all the ways that the statement is wrong, stop and ask yourself, why? Why should a simple claim cause you so much discomfort? It's not like the claim is actually blasphemous or has anything to do with the theology. Also, when you think about the claim in the abstract, it is hardly peculiar or worthy of outrage, even if it turns out to be wrong. To understand this, ask yourself, does Islam conflict with Vietnamese values? Does Islam conflict with the cultural values of Chile? You probably don't know, but it is possible, right? Why couldn't it be? So why the sensitivity with America or the West in particular? I noticed this in myself. I noticed that I hesitated in even articulating to myself the claim that Islam and American values could potentially ever be in conflict. I felt a tinge of discomfort and trepidation, and that bothered me about myself. It was a clear indication of how my thoughts are deeply influenced by my context in ways that I'm not even aware of. Now, my point is not some relativistic, perspectival, postmodern nonsense about how we are all biased, etc. It is possible to transcend these cognitive biases. We do this by bringing our thoughts and inner states in conformity with the higher truth. And we do that by following the Sunnah. The Messenger of Allah ﷺ is reported to have said, quote, "None of you truly believes until his desires are subservient to that which I have brought," end quote. Alcohol and freedom. One of the common lines you hear is that Islam does not respect freedom of choice. This is highlighted by Islam's prohibition of alcohol, its consumption of and sale. In the freedom-loving West, alcohol flows freely. If you wish to partake, you have that freedom of choice. If not, you can choose to abstain. Ultimately, alcohol just affects your own body and doesn't cause anyone else any harm. So as an adult, you can make that decision for yourself, and it would be oppressive for a person or a religion to prevent you from exercising that choice. Let's investigate this. All legal systems constrain choice in one shape or another, and there are justifications that are given for the laws of that system. For example, US law requires a person to have a driver's license in order to operate an automobile. That law severely constrains people's freedom of mobility, but it is seen as necessary for practical reasons. If people are allowed to drive without a license, the number of car accidents will skyrocket. Car accidents fatalities will balloon. Damage to people's property will increase exponentially. So these are all practical reasons why we would want to have such a law in place. It prevents harm. Now, one theoretical point that can always be pursued is what is considered harm and what is considered practical depend on the assumptions you make about the world and your broader beliefs and commitments. But let's bracket that for now. Let's just assume common Western standards of practicality and harm and take a closer look at alcohol consumption. According to the most recent research, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder (FASD) affects at least 5% of the population in the US, and in some communities affect 40%. Fetal alcohol spectrum disorder causes all kinds of psychological and learning disabilities and can result in severe antisocial behavior. A lot of the kids affected by this have to go through special education. Many end up in prison. Many are unemployable and end up falling into drugs and crime. All of this is the result of a disorder caused by pregnant women who drink. Even a small amount of alcohol consumption can be enough to cause an infant to be on the spectrum. The thing is, sometimes women don't realize they are pregnant and continue their drinking habits not knowing that they are potentially giving their unborn child FASD. In any case, the harm that is caused to a child is astronomical. There are fewer harms greater than causing a person to have mental retardation. And beyond the harm caused to the child, there is also the harm caused to society overall. These children become wards of the state. It is state institutions that have to take care of these kids or clean up after them, police them, etc. This is a gigantic public cost that is paid for with our tax dollars coming from our income. All of these things restrict and attenuate the freedom that Western culture so ardently claims to covet. Given all these facts and from this perspective, US law is not clearly more freedom-loving and choice-preserving than Islamic law as far as alcohol is concerned. It is reasoning like this that shows us how vacuous and ultimately meaningless these appeals to freedom and choice really are. Yet it is precisely these appeals that are supposed to get us to realize how restrictive, backwards, and contrary to human progress Islamic law is, and how empowering, forward-thinking, and conducive to human progress secular law is. Don't be a sucker. And the human cost of alcohol is best illustrated with human stories. One news article shared the following. Susan Earle is still coming to terms with the partying she did in her mid-20s, before she became a mother. Back then, she used to spend most weekends at clubs with friends. She usually had a few drinks. Her boyfriend at the time encouraged her because it loosened her up. She was about 6 weeks into a pregnancy when she learned she was expecting. I stopped drinking as soon as I found out, Earle said. It wasn't soon enough. Quinton Mills, her son, born 4 weeks early, had the characteristic facial features of fetal alcohol syndrome. His speech was delayed, and in kindergarten he started biting, kicking, and screaming. He was bullied by classmates. He wet his bed until he was 12. I challenge you not to be heartbroken after reading about this innocent child. Anyone with the slightest amount of sense and compassion would know that something needs to be done to further restrict people's access to alcohol and condition people not to drink. Islam and Islamic culture have successfully maintained virtually alcohol-free societies for centuries. Why can't the rest of the world learn from Islamic success? In any case, it wasn't until relatively recently, after colonization, that this poison has not only been reintroduced into Muslim societies, but has been glamorized by Western media and entertainment, such that Muslims from Tehran to Karachi to Rabat see drinking as a form of liberation and a mark of sophistication. How liberating and sophisticated is society actively inducing mental retardation in its precious children? Is that what you want? If you are not human enough to submit to your maker, at least be human enough to spare innocent children. Hadith on Hudud, corruption and equality. Equality is a crucial component of Islamic ethics, but not all notions of equality are the same. The modern liberal notion of equality, for example, significantly diverges from the notion of equality propounded by classical liberal thinkers. For example, barring women and blacks from voting or owning property was perfectly consistent with their understanding of equality. Be that as it may, one very explicit expression of equality as it relates to justice from the sayings of the Prophet ﷺ is found in Sahih Bukhari as follows. Usama approached the Prophet on behalf of a woman who had committed theft. The Prophet said, "The people before you were destroyed because they used to inflict the legal punishments on the poor and forgive the rich. By him in whose hand my soul is, if Fatima, the daughter of the Prophet, did that, i.e. stole, I would cut off her hand." Another narration on the matter that provides further details. The Quraysh became very worried about the Makhzumiyah lady who had committed theft. They said, "Nobody can speak in favor of the lady to Allah's messenger, and nobody dares to do that except Osama, who is the favorite of Allah's messenger." When Osama spoke to Allah's messenger about that matter, Allah's messenger said, "Do you intercede with me to violate one of the legal punishments of Allah?" Then he got up and addressed the people, saying, "O people, the nations before you went astray, because if a noble person committed theft, they used to leave him. But if a weak person among them committed theft, they used to inflict the legal punishment on him. By Allah, if Fatima, the daughter of Muhammad, committed theft, Muhammad would cut off her hand." Some non-Muslims may bristle at the idea of corporal punishment, but I certainly don't see why reasonable non-Muslims should automatically disqualify the possibility of such punishment as a deterrent for egregious theft. Look at today's world, where investment banks and major corporations have no qualms committing fraud on a global scale, literally stealing billions of dollars from the public and causing all manner of financial crises that have rocked the world over the past decades. Even when some of these bankers were convicted of committing these crimes, did they serve a day in jail? Absolutely not. At most, they were fined. Imagine that. You steal $1 billion, only have to pay a fine of a few $1,000,000. Sounds like a great profit margin to me. But look at how harshly the justice system in many countries treats petty crime by the poor. Steal a cheap TV and you could face years in prison. How is that proportional? Where's the equality there? Corporate malfeasance and illegality on the part of investment banks have resulted in immeasurable suffering the world over as millions of people lost their jobs, lost their homes, and lost their lives. These are crimes that truly deserve hand-cutting. In any case, the Prophet ﷺ forewarned the results of such injustice, and as citizens and residents of these nations, that is bad news for all of us. Jesuit hypocrite. This was my response to Jesuit Charlie a year ago after Charlie Hebdo shooting in France. Charlie Hebdo is a French satirical magazine that often publishes cartoons insulting and mocking the Prophet Muhammad as well as other prophets. I find these calls for freedom of expression and freedom to offend so hollow and hypocritical. All these people pinning for blasphemous cartoons to be published have nothing to lose because they are either not religious or are a religious minority and feel the pressure to conform to the dictates of the secular establishment. If these people were real freedom of expression purists, instead of going for the easy target, they would advocate for the dissemination of something that really offends them, things that go against mainstream liberal secular values. You want to know what is really blasphemous in this post-religious age? Let's see cartoons that denigrate women or their intelligence, cartoons lampooning the disabled, anti-gay cartoons, cartoons that depict the president and other elected officials as pedophiles and sexual deviants, cartoons that mock military personnel as cowards, cartoons that insult the memory of disaster victims, the Holocaust, etc. How willing are people to see these kinds of cartoons in their mainstream publications, distributed across the globe? Of course, I'm not really advocating for such things because I'm consistent and reject the hollow liberal ideology and empty slogans like freedom to offend, etc. But my point is, until you are willing to see something that you find truly vulgar and utterly despicable plastered everywhere for you, your children, and your family to see, don't tell me Jesuit Charlie or whatever. Is Islam about liberty? Both left and right-wing critics of Islam appeal to philosophical liberalism in their critiques of Islam, employing concepts like freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of dress, gender equality, separation of church and state, etc. Please keep in mind that the losing strategy is to argue back against these critics that these liberal concepts are indeed Islamic and that Islam endorses these notions. Yes, there are Islamic positions that can be conceivably understood as partially supporting some of these notions, but it's a highly conditioned endorsement at best. Even if Muslims accept every contemporary Western practice related to freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of dress, gender equality, marriage equality, etc., it will never be enough. Even if Muslims start performing gay weddings in Mecca today, tomorrow the West will ask why there are no transvestite, cross-dressing imams leading prayers in the haram. And if tomorrow they bring tranny imams to the haram, the day after there will be a new criticism of Islam being too restrictive compared to the ever-evolving, ever-progressing West. This is the nature of progressivism, which is the pillar of Western thought and culture. According to this philosophy, constant change is necessary and good. To remain stagnant is to fall behind and end up on the wrong side of history. This philosophy, of course, is completely contrary to Islam and all traditions because traditions require depending on the past. We know as Muslims that the best of times were in the past, with the Prophet ﷺ and the Salaf, and things have been deteriorating ever since. We can never win the battle of who is more progressive, who is more free. So we shouldn't play a losing game. Our winning strategy should be to say that these concepts of liberty, freedom, etc. are incoherent for such and such reasons and they don't contribute to justice and goodness, and Islam offers the best alternatives for humanity for such and such reasons. This is the blueprint for all such debates with modernist progressives. Shouldn't we all support freedom of choice? Question: isn't the main concept of liberal thought to maximize individual choice and rights? Individual choice and freedom is paramount, and by and large, there is no absolute standard to judge that. So shouldn't we as minorities in the West support that paradigm? Answer: the problem is that the existence of law precludes individual choice in any and every society. All people are constrained by laws. Everyone's will and freedom of choice is constricted by the law. But what liberal secularism claims is that laws are only justified when they prevent people from harming others. That's why secular law is acceptable in its restricting of people's unfettered freedom of choice, whereas religious law is unacceptable. The former merely prevents harm, which is a universal interest of all human beings, while the latter is aimed at religious devotion, which only some people who belong to that religion care about and nobody else. There are many conceptual problems with this purported distinction between secular law and religious law. Chief among them the fact that what is or is not considered harm is highly debatable. Why is the secular conception of harm the only valid conception? What is or is not harmful depends on one's greater metaphysical commitments and beliefs about human nature and the world. These commitments are not considered religion per se, but are not categorically different from religious theology. This is how secular liberalism smuggles in its metaphysical and normative imperatives, by masking them as universal features of human nature. A simple and familiar example: abortion. The issue of abortion is often framed as a debate between a religious and a secular side. Depending on what you think about the fetus, its status as a person, the moral responsibilities of the biological parents, etc., abortion is or is not immoral and the subject of legal regulation. The position of the pro-life faction is considered to be driven by religious commitments, which it is, but the pro-choice side is seen as driven by secular concerns and a pursuit of freedom and individual autonomy. But their underlying beliefs about the fetus and the female body, etc., are no less metaphysical than the beliefs of their religious interlocutors. But the debate is not framed in terms of one set of metaphysical beliefs against another, one religion against another. Rather, it is framed as religious conservatism versus secular liberty, religious conviction versus freedom of choice. Why? If we understood the debate as a disagreement between two sets of metaphysical commitments, then we would naturally ask, why should one set be automatically preferred over the other? This is the precise question we should ask for all secular laws. They are all based on metaphysical beliefs that are fundamentally religious in nature, but are not perceived as such. Those beliefs are enshrined in the law and imposed on everyone. We are all forced to abide by the secular religious order and the tyranny of the secular theocratic regime. Does Islam promote equality? There is major confusion on this question. In one sense, yes. Of course, Muslims accept the principle of equality because that is at the essence of all morality. How so? Implicit in any and all moral systems is that two like things ought to be treated equally. If person A shoplifts at a grocery store and we judge that as wrong, then if person B does the same thing, we should also judge that act as wrong, all else being equal. The all else being equal part is important because in one sense, person A and person B are never equal for the simple reason that person A and person B are two different people with two different circumstances, different backgrounds, etc. What is important from the standpoint of morality, however, is that person A and person B are equal in the relevant way and there are no differences that are morally relevant. For example, if person A has green eyes and person B has blue eyes, that is not morally relevant to the fact that both men have committed theft. So we will treat them as equal before the law. But if person A is a millionaire and person B is a starving homeless person, then that is a morally relevant difference and we should treat and understand person B's actions differently. What we learn from this is that our notion of equality is highly dependent on these morally relevant factors. This is important because people nowadays look at Islamic law and say, look at how Islam treats women and men differently. Clearly, Muslim rejects equality. Some Muslims unfortunately also make this mistaken assessment. In reality, however, Islamic law recognizes that there are, in some circumstances, morally relevant differences between men and women. Given that men and women are in actuality very different in certain respects, it would make sense that there are scenarios where those differences would, morally speaking, come into play. From this perspective then, it is not Islamic law that is unjust and oppressive, but rather any system of morality and law that ignores these differences. Furthermore, cheering for and rallying behind the notion of equality, as liberalism does, as if they discovered the concept, is so silly and vapid. They are taking credit for a value that literally everyone has. Again, equality is implicit to normativity itself. Where moral systems differ is how they understand and define those morally relevant factors, and that is a discussion that happens on the meta-ethical and metaphysical levels. For example, instead of pointlessly debating meaningless questions such as whether liberal secularism respects the principle of equality more than Islamic law does, why not debate what an ideal human life looks like? Why not debate what human flourishing entails and what an ideal society consists of? These are the real questions that will, among other things, illuminate these morally relevant factors. But liberal secularism, while hiding behind empty slogans of freedom and equality, says these questions are irrelevant, that people can decide for themselves, and that there is no right or wrong answer. This, of course, is nonsense. Spreading religion versus spreading human rights. Believe it or not, there is not much difference between Number 1. Politically liberal Western powers who want to use military and diplomatic strength to bring the Muslim world into the light of freedom, democracy, and human rights. Number 2. Politically conservative Western powers who want to use military and diplomatic strength to bring the Muslim world into the light of Christianity. Yet many Muslims seem to find the latter somehow more offensive and objectionable, even when the reality on the ground is the same regardless. Freedom to pursue your desires. Ibn al-Qayyim said, opposing base desires will allow the servant to acquire strength in his body, his heart, and his speech. Some of the righteous predecessors would say that conquering base desires need more strength than one who could conquer a city by himself. Modernity teaches people that depriving yourself of what you desire can make you weak, ill, or even cause psychological problems, but in reality, deprivation with respect to our base desires is a source of strength for body, heart, and mind. Sadaqallahu al-Azim.